have for you today Chapter 3 of the Emily Braun's Laments of Blood and Flesh. This will be the last chapter narrated by Dusty, our senior female VA. Senior female VA title will pass to Danger, and we'll have a new narrator next video. Work is still progressing on the Veil Rider RPG book, as well as getting the first Emily Braun's book published. It is currently about halfway done. I'm waiting on the cover art from Chloe. Be sure to stop by Red Cotton 1 for all your protein and supplement needs for while you're working out and keeping healthy, as well as stop by the coffee page. There you can find signed books, keychains, patches, that kind of thing. Are you scratching yourself? A special thing about the coffee is that they're memberships, and with these memberships you get teasers as per chapter, as well as the roles for each character, so you kind of have a secret idea of what's going to happen maybe in the chapters. So it's pretty fun. A lot of people enjoy having the teasers, because I know Snuffy Squad gets a small selection of a few sentences, the E5 Mafia gets a paragraph, and the first shirts get an entire page from the upcoming chapter. Anyway, let's go ahead and get Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. A Big Bonnie Tyler Fan. Emily's heels panged painfully as she landed on the other side of the mile-marker Cola fortification wall, the screeching ache quickly subdued by the torque.
All right, chosen one, let's get a move on. I'll boost your leg muscles,
the torque said, giddily into her head, and Emily felt her leg muscles swell with excited power. "Don't tear my fucking ACL," Emily muttered into her head as she took off at a dead sprint, ignoring the yelling behind her.
"Emily, are you insane? Get back here!"
Tar screamed down at her, while Yapuya whooped from beside him.
"Go get ass, Emily!"
Tar snarled at her.
"It's get that ass, yoy."
"Go get all the ass!"
Yapuya screamed happily, waving her 40mm grenade launcher at Emily's back.
"Is she fucking insane? She can't take on the entire horde,"
the security officer said in shock, turning to look at the now growing gaggle of rubberneckers building around him. The Billings diver was grinning wide, cradling a large rifle in her hands.
Don't worry about it, Uniform. I'm sure she's got an ace up her sleeve."
As Emily ran, she snarled a wide grin, her legs pumping with unnatural strength and speed while her arms rocked back and forth, keeping the polehammer balanced in front of her chest. Emily's hair braid whipped around her like a tail, the end thumping the air as it snapped back and forth. She was upon the stragglers within seconds, their eyes wide as the boiling horde of fish-headed cultists loomed behind them, almost within spitting distance.
"What are you doing?"
A man called out, trying his best to support a wounded female diver.
"Are you crazy?"
"Keep moving!" Emily shouted, using the polehammer to gesture towards the cola gate. "Keep fucking moving!" The wounded female diver looked up with a wince, her head oozing blood from a large cut on her scalp, spying Emily.
"Are you... There's no fucking way."
"Holy shit! That's Emily Braun's."
Another man wheezed, one hand clutching the aching stitch in his side, while his other hand was preparing a suicide grenade, the pin already halfway out of the spoon. Emily blew through the struggling gaggle of divers and kept running, as those stumbling forward only spared a background glance.
Her ass looked a lot smaller in the pictures,
the female diver said with a raspy laugh, her face pale due to blood loss. The diver supporting her chuckled dryly, still trying to haul them both forwards.
"Yeah, she must work out."
Emily kept pumping her legs as the horde loomed closer, and she realized that their tone had changed as soon as she blew through the struggling survivors. They went from laughing and hooting, chasing down wounded prey with glee, to suddenly facing their most hated enemy at the current moment in time. It was as if someone had flicked a switch and changed their attack settings as soon as Emily loomed into view. Their faces became serious, their eyes wide with recognition, and they started now running with earnest, only loping behind the exhausted divers at the current pace to draw out the suffering.
Oh yeah, they want you bad.
The torque chuckled into Emily's mind, and she could almost hear its rubbing its non-existent hands together. Emily remembered back to the forest, to when she was crouched down in the bushes, to the struggling, whimpering harpy being butchered alive, the fear pouring out of his eyes and his muffled screams as the blade came down and down into his body, to the memory of Marill waiting for death as they tried to play with her body, giving up on the hope that Emily was ever going to come save her in time, giving herself to death. Her blood boiled as rage curled in her stomach. That deep, raw hate pouring into her like a fire that could turn the world to ash. Emily's face contorted into a wordless, jackal-like snarl. Her teeth bared, nose wrinkled, and fists gripping hard at the haft of the polehammer. Inside Emily's head, the torque hummed in pleasure.
Ah, there it is. There's that bloodlust I smelled inside of you.
The charging cultists glowered back at Emily with the same deep hatred, fueled by the zeal of their so-called gods. To them, they were holy crusaders facing down a demon, and they were going to have their victory one way or another. They were legion, and this was only some human where she didn't belong. The two entities closed the distance wordlessly, the only noise the growing growl of throats anticipating revenge, glory, or the reward of taking down the infamous Emily Bronze.
Focus that rage, Emily. I want you to focus all that rage into the head of this hammer. See how it glows?
The torque said, and Emily spared a glance to the head of the polehammer. It had been glowing faintly, but as she looked at it, it burst into flame as if someone had thrown a match onto a pool of gasoline. Emily felt the polehammer in her mind like a thought, and it was oddly easy to focus her rage into it, the fire growing and licking at the air like a hungry animal.
Superhero landing,
the torque said eagerly. What? Emily thought, startled as she felt even more power funnel into her legs and her pants were pulled taut by the expanding muscles.
Superhero landing,
the torque said again, and she could feel its own adrenaline pumping into her veins. I should have never let you watch Deadpool, Emily screamed into her brain, but she opened her mouth in a feral smile as she hopped forward, squatting down on her heels. When she lunged upward, she put every inch of strength into her thighs and calves, pushing away from the tunnel floor with such force it actually buckled under her boots, launching herself skyward towards the horde that had skittered to a stop. After all, what kind of madman would just decide to jump in the middle of a tunnel? Emily brought the polehammer up and overhead, pressed herself to the ceiling of the tunnel, then pushed away with the polearm in her legs, rocketing herself down towards the massive swarm of cultists. Their momentary pause bought the fleeing divers even more time, and they quickly shambled onwards towards the gates. Emily whirled the polehammer around her, moving it to slam down onto the ground as soon as she landed, howling wordlessly as her braided ponytail trailed behind her. The torque screamed a wordless war cry into Emily's head as well, relishing the feeling of hurling itself into the fray once again. Emily came down like a meteor, slamming the head of the polehammer into the ground with such force that the impact was felt inside mile marker Cola. A few of the turrets attached to the ceiling of the tunnel let out panicked noises to their fellows as they lost their grip, only barely managing to hold on as the entire tunnel shook like a depth charge had gone off. As the energy from the magic-infused hammer detonated on the tunnel floor, the stonework buckled like shattered ice, jutting upwards violently and breaking legs like they were dry tree limbs. The concussive flame wave that rippled along the ground tossed the fish-headed cultists through the air like a gust of wind through an office window, scattering them like paper. Roaring, hungry flames cooked hundreds of cultists to blackened, charred husks, filling the air with both the rank smell of burning human flesh and the bristling scent of scorched fish scales. The inferno was upon them so quickly they didn't even have time to fully scream. Their wails turned into steaming hisses out of blackened mouths. Due to the tunnel itself, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The flames scoured the floor and walls like a rush of fuel from a flamethrower. Emily didn't even pause for the effect, her braids swinging as she waded through the still hissing corpses to crunch the hammerhead of the polearm through skulls and bodies alike. She pushed over blackened carcasses in her way to get at the cultists who were still living, her eyes glowing with palpable rage as she brought the hammer down. Every strike of the bullhammer pulsed out a punch of flame, bursting out the other side of her victims like a shaped charge. Emily roared like an animal, swinging the hammer around with basic, brutal efficiency, foregoing technique entirely as she twisted the pullhammer and cleaved through bodies purely by her unnatural strength. Torsos ripped in half wetly, the ragged flesh cascading blood in showers as organs flew free of their cages. Heads turned to messy pulp as Emily spun the hammer around in a backhand, the rear spike punching through skull and brain like drywall. By 10 swings of the hammer, Emily was already smoking from the blood boiling on her flesh, giving her a demonic visage to any cultist who looked upon her. By 30 swings of the hammer, Emily was wreathed in steam like the devil herself. True to the Torque's words, the chase for the divers was abandoned entirely as all the cultists turned to engage Emily, who had begun a running retreat towards mile marker Cola. The shock was wearing off. The tunnel was still far too wide to plug with just one person, and Emily realized the cultists were starting to wrap around her as she began to slay 2 or 3 at a time with broad, flaming strikes. Fire lit across Emily's chest as the first enemy retaliation struck home, the blade slicking across her shoulder and collarbone with a rip of bladed edge to cloth and flesh. Emily howled in fury as she whipped the pullhammer around at the head of the perch-faced man. The hammer hit in flesh and bone with a hollow, metallic punk as the head tore away from the neck with a spray of blood and flailing arteries. The ruined skull bounced off a catfish-faced woman beside him, causing her to stumble and faceplant into the ground. Emily had to keep quickly dashing and backpedaling towards Cola to avoid getting swarmed, the task made easier by the width of the tunnel and her speed, but still hampered by the absolute thunderous number of cultists crying out for her blood. More slashes and wounds ripped across Emily as she continued to fight, her flesh flashing with flame as the Torque quickly sealed the wound shut. With a cry of pain and growing rage, Emily raised the hammer of the polearm once again, and it blazed to life with fire so hot it was almost white. She slammed down onto the ground, throwing cascading flame down the tunnel along with a shock wave worthy of a C4 charge. Hundreds of bodies were once again hewn all at once, blasted to pieces from the shock wave tearing their bodies apart, or from the flame cooking them so quickly their bones locked in place, saving their positions as they were cooked alive in the flash of unbearable heat. Emily heaved out a ragged breath, panting as she turned and started running as fast as she could towards the mile marker Cola defensive line. As she did, she saw the gates open wide and quickly usher the remaining divers inside, everyone else on the gate watching her intently.
I may have overdid it.
The Torque panted in Emily's head, and she felt the strength slowly leaving her legs.
Forget that, I'm a little underpowered at this stage.
Oh, come on, dude. Get me to the gate. Emily wheezed back at him, sucking in breath as fast as she could. Behind her, the cultists were slowly starting to rally, having quickly retreated to avoid the cascading flames.
Ah, shit.
The Torque puffed, and Emily felt her leg muscles begin to slowly shrink back to their normal size. Son of a bitch! Emily coughed, energy draining away from her as if someone had pulled the plug in a bathtub. The head of the polehammer began to cool, trailing steam as the cooked gore on the steel sizzled. The security officer on the wall leaned over the edge, slapping his hand on the steel skin.
50 yards, Emily! 50 yards!
Let's go, you little flamin' tart.
The Billings diver screamed out as well, slamming both her hands on the armor of the wall. Everyone began to slowly share the call, slamming their hands onto the wall of mile marker Cola while sharpshooters quickly scattered to train their scopes onto figures lunging after Emily. The crack of bullets zipped by Emily, thudding wetly into the faces of cultists who were a bit faster than the others. Motherfucker, son of a bitch! Emily wheezed, looking over her shoulder as thousands of cultists realized she had drained herself of energy. They were running at her at full speed, eyes wide with the glory of their goal at hand. Emily, her body's strength quickly fading, pulled her CZ-75 from its holster and half-turned, firing randomly into the surging horde behind her.
10 feet! Emily, get out of the fucking splash zone!
The security officer screamed, then turned, gesturing to the rest of the divers and security personnel.
Get those fucking guns running! They're gonna catch her!
If Emily hadn't steeled herself for it, the rippling cavalcade of gunfire that erupted from the wall would have caused her to shrink to a stop. It was odd, as everything seemed to be quiet just before everyone pulled back on their triggers at once. The wave of crackling, snapping, zipping bullets suddenly coursing over her head was so thundering that it almost made her scream and hold her arms over herself. Bodies slammed to the ground in a wave behind Emily as she stumbled past the range of the spider turrets, the cultists so close she could hear them fall into the tunnel floor just behind her. A stray bullet ripped by Emily's ear, and she made a note to not take that personally. She kept running, pumping her legs and pullhammer, bearing arms as fast as she could. The foremost spider turrets perked up in their positions, their barrels adjusting in jerky twitches. After a few more short twitches, the barrels began to spin before spewing forth bright yellow streams of plasma shot. The payloads hit the ground and then exploded in streaming waves of heat, the stands of splintered energy punching through the flesh and armor of the cultists with grisly ease. A few strands of the almost honey-thick energy splashed by Emily, and she shrunk away from them with a squeal of panic.
Ladder! Use the ladder, you brave little moron!
The Billings diver called out to Emily, swinging a large wooden ladder over her shoulder and then holding it steady as Emily turned and aimed her body towards it. Emily was so focused with running that she bounced off both the ladder and the metal wall of mile marker cola, landing heavily on her ass with a rattle of the polearm and her gear. A tittering laugh echoed down from the wall, and Emily looked up with pained eyes to the Billings diver.
You fucking doofus, get up here before you die,
she said, beaming proudly down at Emily. You got it, Emily hissed in pain, quickly scrambling to her feet and ascending the ladder. Yapuya's 40mm blooped from atop the wall, the high explosive warhead detonating amongst the writhing mass of bodies with a muffled, wet burst of efficiency. Not waiting for her to finish climbing, the Billings diver and a few other divers pulled the ladder up, grabbing Emily by the waist of her pants and hauling her over the edge. Emily slammed down onto the walkway with a hollow clong of metal, her chest heaving and legs feeling as if they were going to fall away from her hips. Did everyone make it? Emily gasped, quickly brushing away a piece of hot brass that had bounced off her forehead and rolled near her neck.
Everyone that was in that group,
the security officer said happily, handing Emily her Bren rifle.
Good job, Emily.
Thanks, Emily coughed out, holding out a hand and getting hauled to her feet by the Billings diver. Muriel had commandeered a normal M2 and was blasting away with it, its mounted tripod resting on one of the air conditioners. Yapuya, Davin, and Tarj were raining hell down in the charging wave, and their faces were oddly contrasting. Davin and Tarj had faces of stern, placid professionalism, simply laying rounds down where they were needed and adjusting when required. Yapuya, on the other hand, had a smile almost as wide as Muril's, loading 40mm grenades into her launcher with such flair that it was quite evident she was enjoying herself. Yapuya aimed lazily, trying to find the tightest pack of cultists, then let her body rock with the 40mm recoil, blasting out the end of her M79 with its iconic thoop. A deafening whir began to fill the air, and Emily looked up to see barrels spinning on more spider turrets as targets came into range. With a hiss akin to the weapon of the stone serenade, vibrant plumes of explosive plasma rained down from the ceiling of the tunnel again, landing with wet explosions on the ground and charging cultists. The plasma flew through the air so slowly that it looked out of place to Emily. These balls of heat just flittering down to the ground like wiffle balls punted by some toddler off a tee. When they landed, the plasma itself detonated, thudding in a dull explosion while expelling waves of heat so hot the cultists caught in the middle of the blast seemed to just disappear. First there was a plume of ash and steam, then as the heat formed the concussive bubble, the hot burst of air ripped them apart, throwing arms, limbs, and chunks of torso like someone blowing cherry jello out of a drink straw.
Copy, Bright Lance. Keep them sustaining that rate of fire until they get to about 75% overheat.
The security officer shouted into his wrist, the same hand pressing its index finger into his ear.
Have the reserve start firing their grenades. 3-round burst. I don't want to overheat the MK-29s.
Emily hunkered down as the spider turrets staged in the middle of mile marker Cola all snapped their turrets to the right, rattling away with their grenade launchers in a hellish chorus, the fat rounds thrumming and thudding over Emily's head. They splashed down with the same ferocity as the plasma rounds, exploding in shock waves of heat, shredding metal fragmentations. Thousands already lay dead and scattered on the approach to Cola, and Emily could see they would still make contact with the wall. "They're going to reach us!" Emily shouted over to the security officer, who nodded and gestured around him.
All units to repel borders.
He said into his wrist mic, and everyone along the wall drew their smoking rifles and machine guns either over their shoulders or onto the ground, instead pulling out pistols and melee weapons.
Oh yeah!
This is the shit that Mommy likes.
The Billings diver crowed, pulling out a long, glittering combat blade and a pistol that Emily had never seen before. "What the hell is that thing?" Emily asked her, quickly pulling out a fresh pistol magazine while tossing the pullhammer to its rightful owner. The Billings diver shrugged.
No idea. Only thing it says on it is PKD. Whatever that means.
Emily blinked, slammed the new magazine into her CZ-75, then pulled out the broken back sea-axe she looted from the old camp she had rescued Marill from. With an angry thought, she suddenly regretted selling the massive axe she had also found, but the long, thickly spined fighting blade felt somehow comforting in her hand.
They're coming up the walls!
A male diver screamed as the wave of cultists finally made contact, the thick metal walls shuddering as bodies slammed into it.
Adjust fire away from the walls! Pelt the ones still coming in!
The security officer screamed into his wrist as magical ladders were summoned from pouches or rings, implanting themselves into the walls with enchantments so powerful that not even explosives could get them off. Emily shifted from one foot to the other as Marill continued thudding away with her machine gun, the barrel so hot it looked as if it had come straight from the forge. Rifles and other guns crackled all along the wall as targets loomed into view, and Emily's anger flared to life again as the first fishy face popped over the lip of the fortification. He was a minor cultist, as his face was only mildly fishy, appearing to be some kind of barracuda, and Emily split his forehead with a hollow point. The cultist didn't even have time to death rattle before he was ripped out of the way by a far more powerful bass-faced cultist, their scales scorched with plasma burns. He lifted a wicked-looking battle axe that was wreathed in seaweed, and Emily reflexively held up her sea axe, bracing it across her other forearm. The cultist gleamed a snaggletooth smile as they brought the axe down, expecting it to punch through the little dagger and then split Emily down to her crotch. To both Emily and the cultist's surprise, the sea axe rang with a soul-shuddering toll, as if the axe had struck a huge church bell.
What?
The cultist angrily squelched out past their fishy lips. They lurched, finding themselves stuck in place, their arms locked in the position they were in as the blades touched. Emily pulled her sea axe away, her ears ringing painfully. "Fucking hell, that's loud!" The cultists jerked and bucked their shoulders, trying to pull the axe back towards their guard, and they roared in wet, frustrated rage.
No, I have the bracelet in my grasp.
Emily reversed the blade in her grip and swiped it across the cultist's wrists. Same as it had before, the blade easily sliced through armor, flesh, and bone as if it were sliding through water. The cultist screamed as the axe lamely dropped to the ground and bounced off of the walkway, hands still clutching the haft, and brought their handless stumps to their face.
What? How?
They gargled before the glittering blade wielded by the Billings diver slipped through their neck, the still snarling head falling backwards and away from the body. Emily didn't have a breath to say thank you as more bodies tumbled over the lip of the wall, roaring out fishily as they tried to find footing. Emily raised her sea axe, slashing, cutting, and stabbing at anything that was foolish enough to get in range. When her exhaustion caught back up to her, she swung her CZ-75 up and around to her eye, blasting fist-sized holes through anything that dared to have scales in her presence. Along the wall, the melee was fierce, both sides struggling for control as divers and security personnel were bludgeoned off the walkway with trailing screams, and cultists were cut down or blown apart by melee and close-ranged weapons.
Almost recharged.
The torque said in her head, and it sounded like it was panting.
Plunge your fist in that body.
"What?" Emily said in shock, looking around at the beheaded body of a diver laying along the walkway, the wild melee around her chaotic and boiling.
The blood. Get me the blood.
The torque said raggedly, screaming out with Emily as a spearhead cut along her shoulder. "Are you out of your mind?" Emily screamed at the Torque, rolling out of the way of the plunging spear as a diver wielding a short sword took up the hole in the defensive line.
We're getting overrun, and you're going to be taking wounds here in a bit. I need the power. Get me the blood.
The Torque gasped raggedly in Emily's head as the wound in her shoulder sputtered with weak flame, just barely sealing the wound. Emily groaned in her throat, but obeyed, slamming her knife and fist into the stomach of the long-dead diver. The effect was immediate, and Emily felt power surge up her arm as if she had plunged a fork into an electrical outlet. The Torque roared with renewed vigor, and she heard it clap its hands in her skull.
Yes, that's the stuff.
Emily's shoulder wound zipped closed with a quick burst of flame, and she stood up more solidly footed as the Torque bled energy into her.
Grenaders! Grenaders, get your asses up here!
The Billings diver screamed, turning around with a cultist choking under her arm, her blade digging into his face. A wave of other divers, all bearing grenades, exploding vials, and even packs of C4 charged up the walkways, shoulder-checking their way through the melee.
Emily, cut me a path!
A female diver called out to Emily, her arms full of daisy-chained Semtex charges. Behind her, another diver struggled up, his arms full of Bangalore torpedoes with "To whom it may concern" written on them in chalk pen.
Me too. Do the hero thing you did earlier.
What am I, a fucking birthday clown? Emily barked at them as a screeching cultist came crashing down the staircase. Having caught a crackling all-pike through his chest and screaming through the electrical pulses frying his system, Emily pulled her fist and sea-axe from the dead diver's chest, which caused both of the grenaders to blanch.
Was her hand in that guy's stomach?
The Bangalore-wielding diver asked, turning to look at the other diver beside him. The other diver grimaced, worrying a fuse in her hand.
I'm sure she has a good reason.
Without further word, she drove up the stairs after Emily, who turned and saw that the cultists were now almost too deep amongst the divers, and the bodies were starting to pile up on both sides. One diver leaned over the side to throw a grenade and screamed in horror as a tentacle loomed over the wall above him, flexing and glittering wetly in the floodlights. The pulsing green limb came crashing down over the defensive lip onto the diver, and he bawled in terror as it dragged him over, ripping him away and down into the cultists. A massive cultist berserker with the face of a grouper was causing havoc on the walls, swinging a massive two-handed sword that was also wreathed in seaweed, something Emily was finding to be a pattern amongst the stronger cultist fighters. The grouper-faced woman was bisecting divers and security personnel with brutal ease, and was establishing a beach lead for more cultist fighters that were pouring over the walls. "Keep moving!" Emily screamed behind her at the two grenaders, fighting her way up the stairs with her CX as she holstered her CZ-75 and whipped out her mare's leg. Emily caught another incoming fighting blade on her CX, the cultists gurgling in confusion as they were locked in place. As she did swing up her mare's leg one-handed, training her eye along the sights till they rested on the chest of the berserker, the large cultist crushing a diver's head in her massive fishy hands. The 357 Ursa Penetrator roared from the barrel, and Emily didn't even jerk from the recoil as the Torque kept her still. Somehow, someway, the berserker knew the bullet was coming and pulled up the woman she had in her fist, attempting to block the round with the body shield. The 357 Ursa still punched through the body with ease, embedding itself in the scaled chest of the berserker who roared in pain, stumbling backwards. The huge grouper-faced woman roared, throwing the body away with rage.
Emily Bronze!
"Keep moving!" Emily screamed again, pulling her sea-axe away from its stuck target and cutting through the chest of the cultist, all the way down to the spine. The cultist gurgled and fell to the side, tumbling down the stairs as the two grenaders bundled after Emily.
Emily Bronze! Emily Bronze!
The berserker called out in a bellowing challenge, thundering down the walkway and pushing both diver and cultist out of her way with little care. The steps of the massive woman shook the walkway, and Emily ducked and whirled through the melee, cutting and slicing at any limb that wasn't in the proper uniform. 10 cultists fell to their knees as Emily sliced and ripped her blade through chests, necks, and armpits, blood falling onto her skin with sizzling hisses.
Holy shit, she's doing the smoke thing!
The Semtex-bearing diver hissed out happily, attempting to finish arming the rest of her charges. The diver juggling Bangalores giggled back, just as happy.
God damn it. She's so fucking cool.
The Torque groaned in Emily's mind, and she could feel it roll its eyes. Emily just smirked, blocking an attempted gut stab with her CX and then punching it through the man's fishy brain.
Emily, bronze!
Emily snapped her head up and saw the Berserker was only 50 feet away and closing, and now everyone was attempting to get out of her way, either diving back over the wall or down off the walkway, taking their chances with the ground.
Ah, shit.
Emily muttered, implanting her CX into a dead body beside her and now rapidly shoving spare rounds into her mare's leg.
Get your explosives ready.
Working, working.
The Semtex-bearing diver's saying, her hands quickly finishing up shoving wires, plugs, and blasting cups where they needed to be. Emily slammed the last 357 Ursa penetrator into the loading gate, took aim and started rapidly firing and working the lever of the mare's leg, pumping rounds into the Berserker at nearly point-blank range. The first 3 rounds punched through the Berserker's chest and stomach, and alarm flared in Emily's heart as the woman just kept running.
Go down,
Emily muttered to herself, still working the lever action and punching 2 more rounds through the Berserker's chest. Chunks of the woman's fishy ribcage and collarbone blew away, the floodlights shining through her body, but she still did not drop.
Go the fuck down!
Emily screamed, now standing and taking careful aim with her right hand while struggling to pull her CZ-75 with her left. The Berserker's head wavered in her sights as she ran, and Emily pulled the trigger, quickly twirling the mare's leg around and into its holster as she stepped forward with her left leg, bringing up her CZ-75. Despite the 357 Ursa ripping along the side of the Berserker's grouper-faced head, she kept barreling onwards, roaring and gargling as blood filled her gaping mouth.
Go down, go down, go down, go down!
Emily roared back, pulling her knife out of the body and now walking towards the Berserker, firing her CZ-75 rapidly as she began to slowly kick up into a run. The 9mm rounds impacted with little effect, not even stopping the cultist as she raised her massive sword.
Emily, bronze!
She roared, her scaled flesh glittering with her own blood and lead fragments from Emily's pistol ammunition. Emily tossed her CZ-75 aside and charged forward, her own frustration and anger reigniting her bloodlust.
It's Emily Bronze, you fish-faced bitch!
Emily and the Berserker closed, while all around them everyone paused mid-fight, watching with keen interest or curiosity, or quickly dived out of the way to avoid getting caught in the middle. Many of the grenadiers took this moment to rapidly finish up their explosives, panting with shaking hands. Emily smashed into the Berserker with the same force as a squirrel hitting an oak tree. And to keep from slipping off her slick scales, Emily bit down with her bared teeth on the Berserker's scaly breast, growling as blood flowed into her mouth and her free hand gripped a lock of fishy hair. As Emily repeatedly stabbed and dug her CX into the Berserker's flesh, the Berserker roared and slammed the spike hilt of her sword down onto Emily, punching 3-inch holes into her body. The two twirled and stumbled along the walkway, knocking cultists off of their ladders or shoving divers down to the unyielding floor below with pained screams. Dueling warriors of each side had to duck or lunge out of the way of the two, avoiding the flailing Berserker sword or Emily's limbs and then re-engaging their own combatant. Emily's flesh spat out gouts of flame as the wounds were instantly sealed, and the two hurtled off the walkway, slamming down onto the solid tunnel floor. Some of their previous victims screeched and rolled away, avoiding the brawl landing on them.
Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you!
Emily snarled around the woman's breast flesh, blood still pouring out around her teeth as she kept stabbing. And stabbing and stabbing into the Berserker's body, the two continuing to roll around on the ground. Blood-soaked mud and brass casings stuck to both of them, fouling up their skin and hair as they continued their stab-filled brawl.
Why won't you die?
The Berserker bellowed, still slamming her sword hilt into Emily's body, and each time the wound closed with the flame, the Berserker howled in rage.
Bangalore's over. Clear the fucking wall.
The diver called out, pulling the igniter plug with a pop and tossing the long combined explosives over the wall. The diver and the Semtex pulled her own fuse and spun like a hammer thrower, whipping the bundles of explosives over the wall.
Semtex out!
A chorus of other grenadiers called out over the renewed din of melee combat.
C4, going over!
Bundle grenades over!
I have no idea what the fuck these do, but they're over.
Emily paid them no mind as the Berserker was panicking, having thrown down her sword and was now just pulling at Emily with her clawed fingers.
Get off of me! Get off!
She spat as Emily continued stabbing into her body, blood coursing down her scaled flesh in streams.
Get the hell off of me!
Emily, however, did not get off of the Berserker, and if anything, bit down harder. So hard that when the Berserker yanked back on Emily's braided ponytail, the Berserker's large breasts stretched painfully in Emily's teeth, shredding the skin. Emily growled ferally, blood coursing down her chin, and used the pain in her scalp to fuel her battle fever. This caused renewed howls of pain from the Berserker, who now sunk down to her knees, being bled to the wick from the dozens of stab and slash wounds from Emily's knife. She tried to use both of her massive hands to haul Emily off by her ponytail, jerking and pulling with fading strength.
Get off of me!
The Berserker wailed, her grouper face twisting in fear as tears filled her eyes. She let go of Emily's hair and tried for her hands instead.
Get off of me, you little witch!
Emily just growled and ripped her dagger-wielding arm away from the clawed hands, now stabbing repeatedly at the scaled throat of the Berserker. While other blades had trouble, the sea axe found no such resistance, its edge slicing through artery, muscle, and throat alike with ease. A rippling, sky-shattering series of explosions tore through the air as all the explosives detonated, throwing chunks of wall, body, and tunnel floor in a great plume of red-tinged dust. Divers and cultists fell off the walkway, holding their heads and screaming from the shockwave. A great rain of organs, flesh, blood, and corpse mud fell from the sky, landing wetly all over mile marker Cola. Emily paid it no mind as the Berserker toppled backwards, gargling and clutching at her throat as she stared angrily at Emily, now understanding that there was something else happening with the human. Watching as all the wounds once again zipped closed with little gouts of flame. The Berserker choked out, blood filling her gaping grouper mouth and running down her neck in rivers. Emily leaned back onto her knees, straddling the Berserker awkwardly, and slipped her sea axe into her pocket. She flipped her mare's leg up from its holster, loading a blood-smeared round into it and then racking the lever angrily. "It's Emily Braun's," Emily spat, the Berserker's own blood spattering on her fishy face. She held out her mare's leg, placed the barrel against the Berserker's face, and put a .357 Ursa penetrator right in between the Berserker's eyes. The woman's head exploded in a spattering of brain, cartilage, bones, stone, and blood, her arms fallen limp down to her sides in a sad ragdoll. Emily sniffed, turned, and blinked as she realized she was looking into a large gaping hole in the fortification wall, and standing there before her were a large mass of cultists. All of them had slammed to a halt when they realized Emily had killed the Berserker, some of them staring wide-eyed in shock, while others raised their weapons, the rifles and pistols wavering in their hands. Emily stared back at them, spat out a mouthful of blood and breast flesh, then stood and started walking towards the mass of cultists, angrily reloading her mare's leg. "You motherfuckers," Emily rumbled, now slamming rounds into the loading gate and picking up the pace of her feet. The cultists startled backwards, blinking and gaping in panic, but then turned and began to fully flee when Emily screamed and fired her mare's leg, punching around through the gut of a man who was just beginning to grow the eel features on his head. "You motherfuckers, don't you fucking run from me!" Emily bellowed, pulling out the sea axe from her pocket as she started to run. The cultists stumbled backwards, turning back and forth in a panic, but when a cultist woman's head exploded, they all began to scream in a terror-filled frenzy, turning and running back down the tunnel. "Get back here, you fish cunt cowards!" Emily roared, running after them and firing randomly again with her mare's leg. A body fell when the mare's leg barked, and Emily stopped running after the fleeing cultists 20 feet past the hole in the wall, breathing in raggedly as the last boost of adrenaline left her body like a breeze, leaving her wheezing and shaking at the ankles. Around her, bodies lay piled up upon each other, while in some places there were only smoking piles of bones, organs, and blood, all heaped in mounds as if someone had popped a balloon full of butcher runoffs. The cultists never looked back, fleeing back down the tunnel they had come from as plasma and gunfire hounded after them. Emily breathed in deep through her mouth, spat out another mouthful of blood, then turned around, her mare's leg and sea axe drooping towards the ground. Her boots splashed in the crimson muck, splattering her uniform bottoms with filth.
Fuck yeah, Emily!
The Billings diver called out, nursing a broken arm, and a great cry erupted from the scorched and broken walls of mile marker Cola. As the divers continued to pound the sides of the shattered walls with their weapons or fists, Emily weakly raised her mare's leg up in acknowledgement, in which the divers and security personnel erupted with cheers, some even firing their weapons into the air. They were quickly slapped down as the ceiling rubble fell from above, but it did not quell the screams, applause, and pounding of the metal walls.
I told you I'd make you look good,
the Torque said with a mental grin to Emily, though he did sound very tired.
Was a close one there,
Emily agreed, starting her walk back towards the walls.
You have a lot of tiny holes in you, by the way. I tried to make them look like freckles, so she stabbed you a bunch. Like, a lot of stabs. A record amount of stabs, perhaps.
Emily grimaced, looking at her shoulders.
At least you don't have the taste of her in your mouth,
the Torque laughed.
Oh yeah, you had a big old mouth full of her teeth. That's going to be a hit in the legend, I'm sure.
They would be wise not to mention that bit,
Emily thought, suddenly frowning as her tongue found a shred of meat in her teeth.
Emily Titbiter, Berserker Bane.
The Torque said with a laugh, and Emily rolled her eyes.
Well, there's worse things to be called than Titbiter Berserker Bane, I guess.
Emily thought back to it, stumbling over the hissing body of a cultist who had been caught by the Bangalore blast.
Emily! Emily!
The Billings diver began to yell, slapping the side of the metal walls in time, and soon the entire tunnel rang with the war cry, hundreds of mouths screaming her name and slamming the walls with fist, rifle, or sword.
Emily! Emily!
The Torque snorted.
This is gonna go right to your head.
Emily grinned, then began blowing bloody, dramatic kisses to those upon the walls.
Thank you for listening to the last chapter narrated by Dusty. We hope she does well in her future endeavors and that life finds her well. A huge thank you goes out to our first shirt members. That'll be Morgan Doc Morse, Mr. Doom the Kid, Death's Dancer, Dopey X, Insane Medic, and Para. Remember that first shirts get a full page of the coming chapter to themselves with more or less nothing hidden. It's all there. As well, the first shirts always know the roles for each character on the chapter coming up as well. Another huge thank you goes out to our E4 Mafia. That's E Machino, Cole McLean, Kiwi Bastard, Airy, Noah Freeman, Flash of Green, Josh Beatty, and Crusader 0625. E4 Mafia gets a full paragraph as well as the roles for the characters and what's coming up in the next chapter. Then, of course, a thank you to all the Snuffy Squad members. These guys get a small little passage, and more or less, that's the only real teaser they get. But even their contribution helps out the channel a bunch. Just make sure the VAs get all the money they need, and things keep swimming, because Lord knows YouTube ain't gonna give a shit. Hell, I think I won't even got an alert that the last book chapter went out. So you gotta try and stick with it, because YouTube don't always help. So until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that's Amanda, that's Danger, that's RB, that's Likely, that's Aristic, that's Vynn, Fire, Moon Meadow, and Eliza, and that was Dusty Parchment. May life find you well.